"Who do you think you are, sleeping in a bed meant for people like us?" he roared. She quietly stood, wrapping her arms around the two children still fast asleep, for the first time in years. And as the door closed behind her, he still didn't know. He had just sent away the only person his children ever dared to dream of calling Mom. If this story touches your heart, please consider subscribing. Your one click helps keep these healing stories alive. Nathan Hawthorne hadn't slept in 3 nights. The cameras in his 10,000-square-foot estate outside Palo Alto picked up every sound, every door creak, every restless toss from his twin sons' bedrooms. Lucas screamed in his sleep again. Henry scratched at his sheets until his knuckles bled. He'd fired the last 5 nannies. None had lasted more than 3 weeks. Then came Grace Monroe. She didn't come with a resume that screamed Ivy League or European etiquette. In fact, she wore canvas shoes with soles that had clearly been reglued. But she brought silence. Not the cold silence Nathan was used to, but a hush that felt like breath after sobbing. He didn't hire her through an agency. She'd come recommended by a janitor who once cleaned the ER where she used to volunteer during night shifts. "She doesn't fix kids," the janitor had said. "She stays. That's rarer." That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, the twins had stopped hiding their food under their beds. Lucas no longer flinched when a door closed. Henry started humming in the hallways again. But Nathan hadn't let his guard down. Not once. That's why he installed the extra motion sensor outside the master suite. That's why, at 2:11 a.m., when the alert blinked red on his phone, he got up in a rage. He stormed down the east corridor barefoot, past the gallery wall no one ever looked at, toward the room he never let anyone enter. His wife's former room. Now just a pristine, lifeless shell. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open with force and froze. Grace was there. Curled on the left side of the bed, arms around both of his sons. Lucas was nestled in her chest, thumb near his mouth. Henry had one hand on her wrist, as if anchoring himself to something he didn't want to lose. For a second, Nathan didn't move. Then fury snapped him back. "What the hell do you think you're doing in this room?" His voice cracked across the room like a rifle shot. Grace stirred, half awake, lips still mumbling some story she must have been whispering to the boys. He stepped forward. "This bed, this room, is not for you." She opened her eyes gently so she wouldn't wake the boys. "I know," she whispered, "but they had nightmares. I didn't know where else to go." "You overstepped," he barked. "This is my wife's room." Grace sat up slightly. "I'm sorry, I just thought—" "You thought wrong," he snapped. "You don't belong here." And then, in a moment he would never forgive himself for, Nathan did what his own father had done to his mother years ago. He raised his hand and struck her. It wasn't a hard slap, not by his father's standards, but Grace's cheek turned red, and worse, she didn't flinch. She just closed her eyes and let it happen. The silence afterward was suffocating. The boys didn't wake. Somehow they still slept, like the world outside them had finally, for once, held still. Nathan's breath shook. Grace stood, gently unwrapping the boy's arms. "I'll go," she said, voice barely audible. But she didn't reach for her bag. She didn't rush. She tucked the blanket around the boys again, kissed Lucas's hair, whispered something that sounded like, "You are safe." Nathan stepped back as she passed him. Her eyes didn't hold anger, not pride, just a weary grief, like she'd seen this scene before, in another house, with another man. like she had stopped hoping it would be different. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, the house was quiet, not in the peaceful way it had been since Grace arrived, but in the old way, sterile, breathless, hollow. The twins didn't touch breakfast. Lucas wouldn't come down the stairs. Henry asked, "Where's Grace?" Nathan couldn't answer. He told himself it was for the best. Boundaries mattered. Protocol. Reputation. But as the sun climbed and the house sat heavier and heavier on his chest, Nathan opened the door to his wife's room again. The bed still smelled like lavender and lemon balm. The boys had rearranged themselves, one curled where Grace had been, the other hugging her forgotten sweater. And Nathan realized this was the first night they had both slept without wetting the bed, without screaming, without waking him. And he had destroyed it. Not because Grace had done something wrong, but because he couldn't bear the idea of someone from below offering his sons the one thing he hadn't: safety. Nathan sat at the edge of his son's bed, the early morning light slicing through the shutters like accusation. Lucas hadn't spoken a word. Henry's eyes, normally so bright, were dull and full of quiet dread. The house felt too clean again. Too quiet. He noticed the paper under Lucas's pillow when he bent to straighten the blanket. It wasn't a note for the boys. It was for him. A folded piece of stationery from the kitchen drawer. One sentence, handwritten in the smallest, steadiest cursive. "If you can't stay for them, don't chase away those who will. Grace." Nathan sat back, hard. The words weren't angry. They weren't pleading. They simply were. He read the note again, then again. Outside, the groundskeeper's truck passed by with a rattle, and Nathan heard something he hadn't noticed in months: the emptiness of his own footsteps when walking back to his office. He opened the employee file that his assistant had once prepared in a rush. Grace Monroe. No emergency contact, no social security number listed. Just a line about "in process." The background check had been minimal, but spotless. Just the way he liked things. Quiet. Untraceable. But now he wanted more. The address was a church shelter in San Jose. Not even a real mailing address, just a P.O. box and a contact. Reverend Marta Klein, safe haven for women and youth. That night, after putting Lucas and Henry to bed, both sleeping with her sweater, Nathan made a decision he hadn't made in years. He left the estate. The safe haven shelter was tucked in the industrial edge of East San Jose, nestled between a reclaimed orchard and a boarded-up laundromat. The parking lot was cracked, with tufts of grass pushing through the asphalt. But there were murals on the walls, soft faces, open hands, poems in 3 languages. He hesitated before pressing the intercom. The voice that answered wasn't Grace's. "This is Pastor Marta. State your name and why you're here." He cleared his throat. "Nathan Hawthorne. I'm looking for Grace Monroe." There was a pause, then the buzz of the gate unlocking. Inside, it didn't smell like bleach or plastic or trauma. It smelled like lavender soap, lentil soup, and pencil shavings. Kids' voices echoed from a classroom nearby, not chaotic, but purposeful. He followed the voice down a narrow hall until it led to a half-open door. And there she was, in front of a whiteboard, hair tied back, chalk dust on her black t-shirt. She was reading aloud to 6 teenagers seated in a semicircle, their chairs mismatched, their eyes wary but focused. "You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies." She read, Maya Angelou's voice carrying through her own. Nathan's breath caught. Grace didn't falter. She didn't stop when she saw him. She kept reading. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. When she finally turned to him, the room went quiet. She nodded once toward the hallway. He followed her out. She didn't speak, just walked with measured calm until they reached a bench in the small courtyard. There were tomato plants in pots, a hummingbird feeder. He sat first. She didn't. I came to apologize, he said, for what I said, for what I did. She didn't answer right away, just stared at a girl on the far side of the courtyard braiding another girl's hair. You thought I didn't belong in your house, she said finally. That's fine. I've heard worse. Nathan looked at her. Grace, I'm not coming back, she said, quiet but firm. Not as an employee. He blinked. But the boys, I didn't leave because of them, she said. I stayed because of them. I left because of you. He felt the words settle in his chest like sand. Heavy. Dry. You were the 6th home I've worked in, she continued. But the first one where I saw a child wake up and not cry. You don't know what that means to a child. He looked down. I wasn't trying to take over, she added. I wasn't trying to be their mother. I know, he said. His voice cracked. They reached for me, she said. That wasn't part of a job. That was something else. Silence again. A bird chirped overhead, oblivious. Nathan tried to speak, but the words came out uneven. I don't know how to stay, he admitted. Not really. After their mother, I've just been surviving. Grace looked at him, for the first time fully. Not as a man who had once slapped her, not as a paycheck, but as a father unraveling. You don't need to stay for me, she said, but don't make them lose someone else. He stood, suddenly restless. Tell me what you want. She shook her head. It's not about what I want, it's what they need, and what you're willing to do. Nathan nodded slowly. Then I want to try, he said. She turned her head slightly. Try what? Not as your employer. Not even asking you to move in. I want to show up, even if I do it wrong. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. Instead, she handed him a schedule from the community board, creative writing workshops, group therapy for abuse survivors, cooking shifts. She circled one line, Saturday, teen trauma literature, 10 a.m., then looked him in the eye. If you're serious, you'll show up here. The first time Grace returned to the Hawthorne estate, she didn't come through the service entrance. She came through the front door. Lucas answered it before the butler could even get close, his small hands shaking with the thrill of disbelief. Henry peeked from behind the marble column, his face slowly transforming from anxious to something like awe. Nathan stood behind them, wearing jeans and a gray sweatshirt. No tie, no collar, no phone in hand. He didn't say welcome back. He said, we're glad you're here. And that was enough. That first week back, Grace didn't unpack a suitcase. She wasn't moving in. She was just visiting, she told the boys, to see if the house remembers how to breathe. The twins accepted this with curious reverence. They gave her a tour as if she were a returning queen. But things had changed, or maybe they were just being seen clearly for the first time. Lucas now knocked on doors before entering a room, even when it was his own. Henry no longer slept with all the lights on, only a soft orange nightlight shaped like a bear. The cameras in the hallway, Grace noticed, were covered with socks. Nathan didn't comment on it. He just watched. On Friday morning, Henry found an old magnetic whiteboard tucked in the back of the pantry. He brought it into the kitchen, where Grace was pouring pancake batter and Lucas was humming some tune with no words. "Can we make rules?" he asked. Eyes lit up. "Rules?" Grace asked. "Like, not your rules, our rules. For the house." Nathan, sitting quietly at the breakfast island, looked up. Lucas nodded solemnly. "Not the yelling ones, the other kind." Grace tilted her head. "You mean like gentle rules?" "Yeah," Henry said. "Ones that are like hugs." Nathan blinked. Grace smiled. That afternoon, they gathered in the sunroom, the four of them: Grace, Nathan, and the twins. Henry sat cross-legged with a stack of dry erase markers. Lucas brought his sketchbook. "No copying rules from school," Grace declared. "This house needs its own." The first rule came from Henry. Ask before hugging. He wrote it in green with little hearts around the words. Lucas, more reserved, added, "Knock first, always." Grace added, "You can cry here." Nathan hesitated but finally stepped forward. He wrote in quiet blue ink, "No cameras in bedrooms." Lucas blinked. "Really?" Nathan nodded. "I'll remove them tomorrow." They stared at him like he'd just parted the sea. For the next hour, the sunroom transformed into something sacred. Lucas began illustrating the rules with tiny doodles, hands reaching, doors with stars, a crying bear that smiled in the rain. Grace turned the whiteboard rules into rhyming couplets, saying, "If we can feel them, we can remember them." Henry clapped when she finished the first rhyme. Ask before you touch a hand. Not every hug should be a demand. They all laughed at the silliness, but the truth held weight. They created 9 rules total. Each was written on bright cardstock paper, decorated and laminated with a plastic machine Nathan ordered off Amazon that very evening. Then, like small holy scrolls, they were placed in the kitchen, hallway, and fridge. One even went in the laundry room. On Sunday morning, something extraordinary happened. Henry cried, not over a fall, not from fear, not from anger. He cried during a drawing session when he remembered a moment with his mother. The smell of her shampoo, the sound of her saying, "I'm here." And instead of running or hiding, he said to Grace, "I need a blanket." She brought it, sat beside him on the floor. He cried into her arm, and when it was over, he looked up and said, "I didn't know it could be like this." Grace looked to Nathan, who was standing in the hallway, frozen. "I didn't either," Nathan said. Later that night, Grace caught Nathan alone on the back patio, nursing a coffee that had long gone cold. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "I've never had rules like those." "Most people don't," she said. "They think structure means control." He glanced toward the house. "And what do these mean?" "Structure that keeps people whole," she replied. He sighed. "I've been trying, but I don't think I'm built for this." Grace sat beside him. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present." Nathan turned to her. "Do you ever stop saying things that sound like truth wrapped in poetry?" She smiled. "Only when I'm asleep." The next morning, Lucas brought her a drawing. It was of the 4 of them: Grace in a red shirt, Nathan in his gray hoodie, Henry with a cape, Lucas holding a sign that read, "This is our house now." On the back, in shaky letters, he'd written, "Rule 10. You are allowed to stay." Grace looked up, eyes stinging. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a visitor. She felt like a part of something still healing, but healing nonetheless. And sometimes that's enough. The first time Nathan heard himself laugh again, it scared him. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. Lucas had wrapped himself in a fitted sheet, proclaiming himself the great sock wizard, while Henry tried to chase him with a fly swatter in the name of justice. Grace was reading poetry on the couch, half watching, half daydreaming, and Nathan, corporate titan, hawk of venture capital, man who hadn't smiled without agenda in 3 years, laughed. Out loud. The sound startled him. Startled the boys, too. Henry paused mid-swat. "You okay, Dad?" he asked. Nathan cleared his throat. "Yeah, just wasn't expecting that." Grace looked up from her book with the hint of a smile. She didn't say anything, but her eyes said, "Let it happen." And for a moment, Nathan allowed himself to believe he could keep this warmth, this rhythm, this life. But peace never lingers too long in the homes of men who still carry ghosts. On Tuesday morning, a letter arrived by courier. Thick envelope. Manhattan law firm. His late wife's brother, Charles Remington III. Nathan's stomach clenched as he read. Petition for temporary guardianship of Henry and Lucas Hawthorne. Filed under concern for mental and emotional well-being of minor heirs. There was a hearing scheduled in 2 weeks. He didn't even finish reading the page before standing up, nearly knocking over his coffee. Grace found him in the garage, pacing like a man cornered. "Nathan?" He held up the letter like a weapon. "He's trying to take them." She stepped closer. "Who?" "Charles. That pompous—" He stopped himself. "He wants custody. Says I'm unfit." Grace read the letter, her brows furrowing. "He can't just take them," she said, but her voice was cautious. Nathan ran a hand through his hair. "He's got money, influence. He'll paint me as unstable, which I was, which maybe I still am." "Not anymore," she said. He laughed bitterly. "You think a judge is going to believe that because I let my kids paint on the fridge now?" Grace looked at him, quiet. "I'll testify," she said. He blinked. "You're not staff. They won't let you." "I won't testify as an employee," she said. "I'll testify as a witness." Nathan stared at her. "Of what?" he asked. Her voice dropped. "Of nightmares. Of a child pulling out his own hair at bedtime. Of cameras in every hallway. Of a house that felt like a vault. And now, of a home that breathes again." Nathan swallowed hard. The courtroom in Santa Clara County wasn't the kind you see in movies. No oak panels, just gray walls, fluorescent lights, and the dull thrum of government machinery. Charles Remington entered in a navy suit that cost more than most people's rent. His lawyer, a woman named Reed, held a leather folder and a confident sneer. Grace sat beside Nathan in the back row, her dress modest, her presence unshakable. When Charles took the stand, his words were slick with concern. "Nathan is unstable," he said. "He's grief-stricken. He's let a complete stranger influence his parenting." "Objection," Grace's pro bono attorney muttered, rising to counter. But Nathan didn't flinch. When the judge finally called Grace forward, the room shifted. She didn't speak with polish. She didn't have rehearsed lines. She just told the truth. "I was hired to care for Henry and Lucas. At first they were surviving. That's all I can call it. One of them hoarded food. The other had night terrors. Neither could sleep through the night." Charles's lawyer interjected. "Were you trained in psychology, Ms. Monroe?" "No," Grace answered. "But I've lived through enough trauma to recognize it." The courtroom stilled. Grace continued, I didn't fix them. I didn't try. I just stayed. And slowly, they started to sleep. They started to laugh. Henry cried the other day, not from fear, from memory, and he asked for a blanket, not a hiding place. The judge leaned forward. And what do you attribute that change to? Grace looked at Nathan. To someone who finally showed up, even when it was hard, even when he didn't know how. Charles's lawyer sneered. So you're romantically involved? No, Grace said simply. We're surviving the same storm. After the hearing, Nathan sat on the courthouse steps, head in his hands. Grace handed him a bottle of water. You did good, she said. He shook his head. I've failed them in ways I can't even name. She sat beside him. They don't need you perfect, Nathan. They need you present. He looked at her. How do you keep saying that like it's enough? Because, she said, eyes glinting, I've been the kid who didn't have anyone stay. A silence passed between them. He wanted to reach for her hand, but he didn't. Not yet. That night, Lucas came into his father's room carrying a pillow. Can I sleep here? Nathan moved over without a word. Lucas curled beside him. After a few minutes, Lucas whispered, Are we staying? Nathan looked down. As long as you want, he said. And Lucas, already half asleep, mumbled, Okay, I choose here. Nathan closed his eyes. He didn't know what kind of father he was, but for tonight, he was theirs. The intake file was thin, only 5 pages long, but each line read like a wound. Name: Belle Tsarugi, age 16. Foster homes, 6. Last placement: closed for emotional incompatibility. Diagnosis: possible attachment disorder. Severe trust aversion. Art therapy attempted. Discontinued after 3 sessions. Refused to speak. Next of kin: none. Grace held the folder in her lap as she sat in the passenger seat of the county social worker's van, headed north along Highway 101. The silence in the car wasn't awkward. It was practiced, muted, like the space left behind after someone stops fighting. She's the last one left at Ridgeway, the caseworker finally said. The rest were placed or aged out. Belle, she's the one no one could crack. Grace said nothing, just watched the trees blur past the window. Somewhere in her gut, she already knew. The ones hardest to reach were often the ones who had learned to survive alone. Belle stepped out of the van with a posture like steel. She didn't flinch at the gravel crunching beneath her sneakers. Her hoodie was 2 sizes too big, the sleeves almost swallowing her hands. Her skin was olive-toned, hair dyed black but now fading back to its natural chestnut. Eyes slightly downcast, but always aware. She didn't say hello. Grace didn't ask her to. Instead, she gestured toward the porch. There's lemonade and a rocking chair. No questions today. Just air. Belle walked past her without a word, sat in the chair and sipped the lemonade like it might be poisoned. It wasn't the beginning of trust. It was the beginning of absence, beginning to notice the absence of fear. The boys were curious but respectful. Henry whispered to Grace, She's older. Is she dangerous? No, Grace said gently. She's just tired. Lucas tried to leave her a drawing of a robot with a speech bubble that said, You don't have to talk. I talk enough for both of us. She didn't return it, but she didn't tear it up either. On the 3rd day, she took the same chair on the porch without prompting. On the 5th, she asked, quietly, if she could feed the chickens. Grace handed her a small bucket. Belle didn't smile, but her footsteps were slower, less rigid. At dinner on the seventh night, Belle lingered at the table. It was Nathan's turn to cook. Grilled cheese and tomato soup. Belle sat silently until Henry asked about her bracelets. "I made them," she said, voice dry and clipped. "Can I have one?" "No." Then, after a beat, "I can show you how." Grace watched the moment pass like sunlight through water. It was nothing. And it was everything. Later that night, Grace found Belle on the back porch, sketchbook open on her lap, a soft pencil in her hand. "I thought you stopped drawing," Grace said. Belle didn't look up. "I stopped showing." Grace sat down next to her. "What changed?" Belle's pencil stilled. "You told me I wasn't a mistake. If that's true, then maybe I could be a picture." Grace swallowed the ache in her throat. "You've always been one." Belle didn't smile, but she started shading the edge of a girl's jawline. One afternoon, Grace set up a quiet room in the attic, a small converted space with bean bags, fairy lights, a soft rug, and a wall of art supplies. It was Lucas who discovered Belle there, barefoot, standing in front of a blank canvas. He didn't speak. He just laid down on the rug and fell asleep. Belle never told him to leave. She painted until sunrise. 1 week later, Maya, Grace's old friend from Safe Haven, came to visit. Belle watched her from the hallway, wary. "She a social worker?" "No," Grace replied. "She used to be me." Belle tilted her head. "That means she poor or broken?" Grace smiled. "Both. And brave." Belle looked at Maya again. Then, under her breath, said, "Brave's a big word." Maya nodded. "It is. But you're already spelling it with paint." Grace found one of Belle's poems tucked in the back of the art room drawer. Scribbled, chaotic, but alive. "I've been in closets with coats and clocks, in kitchens where no one ate, in homes with no light except the fridge, and even that closed late." She didn't show it to Nathan. Some things were seeds, not stories yet. The turning point came when Henry had a panic attack after a fire alarm drill at school. Belle found him curled up behind the dining room curtains. Instead of calling Grace, she sat beside him. "I used to hide in the laundry chute," she whispered. "Felt like a coffin, but at least I chose it." Henry looked up, still shaking. "What did you do?" Belle took his hand. "I came out when I found someone who didn't knock." "Grace?" "No," Belle said, and looked down the hall. "You." Henry cried harder, but his breath slowed. That night, Belle taped a sign outside his bedroom. "Brave people sometimes panic, too. Still brave." On the last day of the month, Grace invited Belle to the garden bench under the fig tree. "There's a school art show next week," she said. "Optional. No pressure." Belle looked skeptical. "For what?" Grace shrugged. "To show the world what they missed while looking away." Belle looked at her sketchbook. "If I believe you, that I'm not a mistake, then maybe I'll show them what survival looks like in color." Grace touched her shoulder gently. "And they'll be lucky to see it." It started with an email sent at 2:03 a.m. Subject line, "Belle Tarugi, dangerous background withheld from public records." By 7 o'clock a.m., the story had reached 3 local news stations. By 8 o'clock a.m., Grace was sitting across from Maya, jaw clenched, laptop screen glowing with a leaked PDF. It was a fabricated juvenile file, allegedly showing Belle's involvement in a violent altercation at a former foster home. The narrative was carefully edited. The tone, calculated scandal. The damage was immediate. Parents called Grace's home, demanding to know if Belle was still living there. Reporters camped outside the gates, and worst of all, Belle found the story before Grace could tell her. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stopped talking. Nathan arrived from a board meeting to find the house silent in a way that felt wrong, frozen, like air before a storm. "She saw it?" he asked Grace. "She printed it out," Grace replied quietly, "then tore it into strips, equal size, like evidence." "Have we confirmed it's fake?" Grace nodded. "Maya traced it. The timestamps don't match the official court database. The home listed was closed before the alleged incident. It's a forgery." Nathan's jaw flexed. "Someone's targeting her." "She's the perfect target," Maya added. "Foster kid, no family, no money, no legal voice." Nathan's eyes narrowed. "Then we give her one." That night, Grace stood outside Belle's bedroom, unsure if she should knock. Before she could decide, Belle opened the door. Her hair was tied back, her expression unreadable. "I want to speak," Belle said. "Okay," Grace said gently, "but not to you." Grace blinked. "To who?" Belle's voice was steady. "To them." The next morning, a press conference was called. Nathan used his name, his money, his media firm, and all his connections to schedule it at a neutral venue, a community arts center in Palo Alto. Reporters packed the room. Grace stood beside Belle in a simple navy dress. No makeup, no shield, just truth. Nathan made the opening statement. Calm, strategic. "Last week," he said, "an anonymous leak circulated a file claiming our resident Belle Tsarougi had a violent past. That file is fake, and this smear campaign against a child will not go unanswered." Gasps, flashes. Then Grace stepped up. "I've worked in shelters, hospitals, foster centers," she said, "and I've never met a braver child. Belle has spent 16 years surviving systems built to forget her. She's not a threat. She's the proof we can do better." Then came Belle. She approached the mic slowly. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was not. "My name is Belle Tsarougi," she began. "I'm 16. I've been in 6 homes. I've been told I'm too much, too quiet, too cold." A pause. Flashbulbs. "I've never been violent. I've been scared. I've been hungry. I've been invisible." Another pause. A deep breath. "I'm not my file. I'm not what someone made up because I was too small to fight back." Then she lifted something from her pocket, a folded sheet of paper. It was her poem. The one Grace had found and kept quiet about. She read it aloud. "I've been in closets with coats and clocks, in kitchens where no one ate, in homes with no light except the fridge, and even that closed late. But now, I'm in a house that knocks before entering, a room with a lamp that stays on, a life where I'm not a file. I'm a person who stayed." When she finished, the room didn't applaud. It stood. Every reporter, every photographer, every stranger in the room stood. That evening, Maya received a phone call from a legal contact in Sacramento. "We've tracked the IP address of the file leak," he said. "It came from a private device registered under Charles Remington." Nathan nearly dropped the phone. His brother-in-law. Again. Grace whispered, "He wanted to discredit the house. Discredit you. And this was the most vulnerable way in." Nathan nodded grimly. Then we go after him. Not with anger, with accountability. 2 weeks later, the California State Office for Family Care and Youth invited Grace to speak at a panel on restorative trauma practices. She brought Belle with her. This time, Belle smiled when they called her name. She held the mic in one hand and a tiny gold rock in the other, painted by Henry. On the bottom it read, "For the bravest person I know." That night, Grace found a package at the doorstep. Inside, a thick folder, legal paper, a typed note from Yale School of Social Work. "We believe the model you're building could become national policy. Let's talk." Grace sat on the floor and wept. Not because of the offer, but because for the first time in her life, someone saw staying as a strength. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not through email, not by courier, just a single envelope, handwritten, no return address. The paper was creased, soft at the corners like it had been held too many times before finally being sent. Grace didn't open it at first. She stared at her name in faded ink. Grace Monroe. Not Miss Monroe. Not to whom it may concern. Just her name. She left it on the counter all day. Only when everyone had gone to bed, Lucas snoring in the next room, Belle humming while sketching in the attic, did she sit beneath the kitchen lamp and open it. There were only 5 lines. "Grace, if you'll let me come, I'd like to see the kind of woman you became. I'm clean now, 2 years this fall. I don't ask for anything, not even forgiveness. Only a cup of coffee and 10 minutes on the porch. Dad." She stared at the word dad like it had teeth. The last time she saw her father, she was 10 years old, watching a sheriff's deputy escort him out of their 3rd-floor apartment while he shouted nonsense through the haze of withdrawal. She remembered the stains on the carpet, the dented fridge, the way her mother locked the bathroom door and cried into a towel while Grace made peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. For years, she told herself he was dead. It was easier. But now, 2 decades later, he was asking for a seat on the porch she'd built with bruised hands and borrowed time. And something in her, something ragged, but still warm, whispered, "Say yes." He came on Saturday. She made coffee from fresh grounds, even though she didn't know how he liked it anymore. She wore a cardigan Belle had helped her pick out, simple and soft. When the old pickup truck pulled up the driveway, her heart stopped. He stepped out slowly. Not the ghost she remembered. He was thinner, yes, but clear-eyed. Wrinkles like folded paper around his eyes, wearing a thrifted button-up, collar slightly crooked. He held a cap in his hands, gripping it like a shield. He didn't try to hug her. He just said, "You look like your mama, but stronger." She gestured to the porch swing. They sat. 2 mugs. 1 silence. Then he said, "I didn't come to rewrite history." Grace sipped, said nothing. "I came because I heard you made something of your pain." Grace's voice was calm, but dry. "You didn't hear that. You read it in a news article." He smiled faintly. "Still counts." Another silence. "Why now?" she asked finally. "Because every year I didn't come felt like stealing another one from you." She looked out toward the garden. "I don't need anything from you." "I know." He looked down at his hands. Weathered. Honest. "I'm not here for a seat at your table," he said. "I'm here to see the table. Just once." Grace's eyes stung. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he added. I'm asking for something harder. What's that? He looked at her. Grace. Her breath hitched. That's not something you ask for, she said. No, he nodded. It's something you receive. Or you don't. Belle saw them from the hallway window. She didn't interrupt. She didn't listen in. But that night she sat beside Grace while folding laundry and asked, Was it like seeing a ghost? No, Grace said softly. It was like meeting the man who used to be the ghost. Belle didn't speak for a long time. Then, Did you let him in? Grace folded a towel. No. Belle nodded. But I didn't close the door either. A week later, her father returned. Not to visit her, but to volunteer. He showed up for a chicken coop repair day, worked quietly, took direction from Henry like it was gospel. Lucas called him the hammer guy. Belle refused to talk to him, but left him a sketch of the coop with a note. Try diagonal bracing. He used it. Nathan kept his distance, unsure what this man meant to Grace. Until one afternoon he found them repairing a fence together, wordlessly passing nails. When Grace noticed Nathan, she stood. He's not here for me, she said. He's here for what I built. Nathan nodded. That's enough. That night, around the fire pit, her father told Henry how to roast marshmallows without burning them. Lucas didn't listen. He liked the flames. Belle watched from the porch, arms crossed, then slowly walked over. You don't get to talk to them, she said quietly. He looked up. Okay. She paused. But you can build the coop. He smiled. Deal. The next day, Grace found a small envelope taped to the back of the chicken pen. Inside was a folded note. Just one line. If I'm ever welcome, I'll bring the screws. But only if you ask. There was no name, just a drawing, 3 birds on a wire. Grace tucked it into the back of her notebook next to Belle's poem and Lucas's drawing of their house of hugs. That night over dinner, Henry asked, Is he your dad or just a friend? Grace thought for a long time, then answered, He's the man I'm learning how to sit beside. Henry nodded. Okay, he said. I have friends like that too. The idea started with a single envelope. Belle had found it tucked in an old shoebox in the attic, labeled in faded red ink. Letters never sent. Inside were dozens of scraps. Napkins, torn notebook paper, Post-its. Each one a note. Some were addressed to no one. Some began with Dear Mom or To the Man Who Left. Some were barely legible. Others felt like they had been written with shaking hands and absolute courage. Grace read them alone at first, under the flicker of the attic light, tears slipping quietly past her cheekbones. Then Belle found her. You okay? The girl asked. Grace handed her a folded page. Belle read, I screamed for help and the wallpaper didn't move. That was the day I decided not to need anyone. But I lied. They sat in silence. Then Belle whispered, We should show them. Grace blinked. The letters? Not just the letters, Belle said. All of it. What it takes to survive. And so the idea was born. The Hall of the Brave. Not a museum, not a display. A space. For truth. For the kind of bravery that doesn't come with medals. They transformed the old barn behind the garden. Nathan cleared out the tools. Lucas and Henry painted the wooden walls soft cream. Grace called in help from Maya, from Safe Haven, from every contact who'd once whispered, If only someone would listen. They installed corkboards, built frames out of reclaimed wood, set up poetry corners and photo hangers. Belle designed the centerpiece, a spiral path lined with stones, each one painted gold at the edges and cracked through the center. "Why the cracks?" Lucas asked. Belle smiled. "Because they're what makes the gold stay." Kids began mailing in their stories. From shelters in Oakland, from juvenile halls in Fresno, from high schools in East LA. They sent paintings of bruised knees, poems about silent dinners, Polaroids of hands held tight in the dark. No names, just courage. One letter read, "I almost ran away for good. Then someone knocked first. That saved me." Another, "He told me no one would believe me, but now I speak anyway." The barn began to breathe, every wall a pulse of pain and survival, every piece a truth the world had tried to silence. The grand opening happened on a soft April morning, dew still on the grass, tulips in bloom along the path to the barn. They didn't send press releases, no photographers, no ribbon-cutting ceremony, just open doors, and a chalkboard that read, "Come in if you've ever stayed through the storm." Inside, the guests walked slowly. Some cried, some touched the letters gently, like relics from a war they knew too well. Others stood silently, reading each piece with the kind of reverence usually reserved for graveyards. But this was no place of death. This was a place of rebirth. Nathan watched from the corner, his hands folded. Then he noticed Ethan, a boy from Safe Haven, age 9, lanky, always quiet, standing in front of the stone spiral. He was holding something. A gold-painted rock, no bigger than a matchbox. Nathan knelt beside him. "What do you have there?" he asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. Then he held up the stone. "It broke," he said softly, "but I painted the crack blue. That's the color for brave." Nathan took a breath. "Would you like to place it in the center?" Ethan nodded, slowly walked forward, and in front of everyone, no spotlight, no speech, he placed the rock in the spiral's heart. Then he turned, looked at the room, and whispered, "It used to be broken, but now it's bright." That was the moment everything changed. Later that evening, Grace stood beneath the fairy lights on the porch, looking at the barn from a distance. Belle joined her, holding 2 mugs of tea. "They stood in front of it like it was a church," Belle said. "It is," Grace replied. "A sacred place made of cracked hands and healed bones." Belle smiled. "One of the girls from Fresno asked if she could send a painting every month." "Letter. She also wants to come meet Henry. She thinks he's famous." Grace laughed. "He kind of is." 2 days later, a letter arrived from Yale School of Social Work. This time, it wasn't a simple invitation. It was an offer, a 5-year partnership, grant-funded, research-backed, the Hall of the Brave as a national model. Grace read the words twice, then handed the letter to Nathan without saying a word. He read it slowly, then looked at her. "They want to turn this into a blueprint." Grace looked back at the barn, the gold, the cracks. "They should," she said, "but only if we get to keep the silence, too." Nathan tilted his head. "The silence?" "The kind people fill with breathing instead of judgment." He smiled. "Then we give them both." That night, after the house settled into quiet, Henry crawled into Grace's lap with his blanket. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That stone Ethan had, did it really break?" Grace nodded. "But it still got to be in the middle?" "Yes." Henry thought for a moment. "Then I want to paint one too." "What color?" He paused, then said, Whatever color you were when you stayed. Grace was washing strawberries in the kitchen when Nathan came in holding a manila envelope. He didn't speak right away. He just stood by the door, shoulders tight, like a man holding his breath. Grace looked up. Everything okay? He nodded slowly, then walked forward and placed the envelope on the counter beside the fruit. Inside was no ring, no bouquet, no speech, just 3 pieces of paper. 1, a revised copy of his will. 2, an updated power of attorney form. 3, a court-stamped document, co-guardianship of Henry and Lucas Hawthorne. Grace froze. I didn't want to ask you with candles or violins, Nathan said quietly. I wanted to ask you with legal standing. She turned to face him, heart pounding. You want me to be their legal co-guardian? I already trust you with their hearts, he said. Now I trust you with their future. Her throat tightened. This isn't a proposal, he added. Not in the romantic sense. She nodded slowly. Then what is it? It's me saying, I want to stay. But only if you choose to stay too. Silence swelled in the room like a held breath. Grace touched the documents with shaking fingers. This is permanent, she whispered. Nathan's voice didn't waver. So is what you've given them. She looked up. But I'm not perfect, she said. I'm not asking for perfect, he replied. I'm asking for real. Later that evening, after the twins went to bed and Belle retreated to the art room, Grace sat on the back porch alone. The papers were folded neatly in her lap. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of choice. She remembered every hallway she'd cleaned, every room she'd been told she didn't belong in, every goodbye she'd been forced to swallow. And now, someone was asking her to stay, legally, permanently, on paper, with dignity. She looked up at the stars, then whispered to the night, This time, maybe I say yes. The next morning, Grace returned the envelope, signed. Nathan didn't smile. He exhaled, then said the softest thank you she had ever heard. They didn't hug, but their eyes held more commitment than any ceremony ever could. When the boys found out, Lucas asked, Does this mean you're our new mom? Grace knelt beside him. It means I'm not going anywhere. Henry leaned in. Even if we fight sometimes? Grace smiled. Especially then. Lucas looked at Nathan. And you picked her? Nathan nodded. But she picked us, too. That night, Henry drew a picture of a house with 4 windows, a rainbow, and a sign on the roof that read, She chose us. The community learned about the guardianship the same week a news story aired about the Hall of the Brave going national. Reporters called it unconventional. Some praised the courage. Others questioned the lack of tradition. One anchor asked, But where's the ring? Where's the romance? Belle clapped back in a private blog post that went viral overnight. Some families don't start with fireworks. They start when someone chooses not to leave. On the weekend after the documents were filed, Nathan built something in the backyard. Not a fence, not a deck, a bench, under the fig tree. He carved one sentence into the wood. She stayed. When Grace saw it, she didn't speak. She just sat and stayed. That night, Belle sat beside her in the garden and said, He didn't propose, but he gave you something more dangerous. Grace smiled. What's that? A home. Grace looked out over the lawn where Henry and Lucas were chasing fireflies. I think, she whispered, this is the first time I'm not waiting to be asked to leave. Belle was quiet. Then she whispered, "Then let's both stay." The conference hall in Sacramento wasn't made for silence, but that morning, it held it like sacred air. Rows of social workers, educators, lawmakers, and foster care alumni filled the seats. On stage, a single microphone waited. Behind the curtain, Belle adjusted the sleeves of her burgundy dress, her hands shaking slightly. Grace touched her shoulder gently. "You ready?" she whispered. Belle looked out through the slit in the curtain, saw the lights, the crowd, the weight of being listened to. "I'm not sure I'm brave," she said. Grace smiled softly. "That's okay. Just be honest." Belle took a breath, then stepped forward. She didn't walk like a victim. She didn't speak like a statistic. She stood tall, held the mic like a torch, and said, "When I was 9 years old, I stopped talking. Not because I had nothing to say, but because no one looked like they were staying long enough to hear it." The audience leaned in. "They always called me angry, cold, difficult. I wasn't any of those things. I was scared. Scared that if I asked for help, I'd owe someone love I didn't have left to give." She paused, looked at the back of the room where Grace stood beside Nathan, holding Lucas and Henry's hands. Then she continued, "But then someone stayed. She didn't fix me. She didn't promise happy endings. She just made room for the mess I came with, and little by little I started talking again." Belle reached into her pocket, pulled out a small folded square of golden paper. "This is a piece of a letter I once wrote but never sent." She unfolded it, read aloud, "If you stay, I'll tell you the truth, but only if you stay." Then she looked at the audience. "And now I'm telling you all." Tears, but no sobbing, just the quiet breaking of centuries of silence. And then, applause. Not polite, not programmed, earned, rising like the ocean. After the speech, Grace was swarmed by conference directors, program heads, school representatives. One of them asked, "What's your title?" Grace looked over at Belle, who was laughing with Maya, her gold rock still in hand. She turned back. "I'm not a title," she said. "I'm just someone who stayed." By that summer, the Hall of the Brave had become more than a barn. A new center broke ground in Oakland, backed by community partners, run by people who had lived the system themselves. Grace was offered the role of national director. She declined. Instead, she recommended Belle. The board hesitated. "She's 17. She's not certified." Grace folded her arms. "She's the reason this exists. If you want a credential, she'll earn it. If you want someone who knows what it means to survive, you already have her." They agreed. Belle became the youngest director of trauma arts and storytelling in California history. At the opening of the Oakland Center, Henry and Lucas helped cut the ribbon. Belle gave them tiny gold pins in the shape of cracked stones. Henry asked, "Does this make us brave?" Belle knelt beside him. "You always were. This just lets the world know." The last scene of that season unfolded on a quiet ride home. Nathan drove. Grace sat in the passenger seat, dozing lightly. Lucas was asleep in the back. Henry leaned forward and whispered, "Mom?" Grace turned. "Yes, honey?" His voice was small. "Will you still stay? Even if no one's clapping anymore?" She smiled. "I don't stay for the applause," she said. "I stay because I love you." A pause. Then he asked, "Will you always choose us?" Grace didn't hesitate. Always. That night, at home, she lit a single candle in the kitchen. Not for tradition, not for grief, just to mark that this house was no longer temporary. It was, at last, a home. No one in this story was perfect, just people who had been hurt, forgotten, and chose to stay. Not with promises, not with a ring, but with dinner on the table, a light left on, and one simple sentence: "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." Some families don't begin with blood. They begin the moment someone chooses not to leave. And from where they sit, the light begins. If you believe in healing stories, hit subscribe and stay with us a little longer.